Great. Good evening, everyone. It's November 18th. It's our Just Transitions Subcommittee meeting. And I believe we have a quorum. I realized I didn't do that count before we started. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Great. I think that gets us there. The first thing I want to do is, unfortunately, first I need to not start with announcements. First, I need to say welcome. And if you would be so kind as to introduce yourself in the chat box. Both guests and subcommittee members are invited to do that. And if you feel so inspired to share a gratitude, that is a great practice that we have started cultivating at the start of our meetings. So I'll share mine out loud to get you inspired. I spent last evening in Groton at the community center watching my 3 children, 8, 12, and 14, all test for Taekwondo to get their next belt, succeed. And it is just something else to see your kids work hard at something and then succeed. So that I'm feeling really grateful for that today. So anyway, just encourage you all to introduce yourself in the chat box and share gratitude if you feel like it. And I didn't introduce myself. So I'm Sarah Phillips. I'm the director of the Office of Economic Opportunity in the Agency of Human Services. So we have a pretty busy agenda tonight. I don't know, Marion, if you're able to drop the link in the, you already did drop the link in the chat box. People can link to the agenda if they want. We're just going to do a quick check-in this morning. I'm reviewing the agenda right now, and then we'll approve the minutes. We baked in a pretty good solid chunk of time today for public comment, and just really want to thank 350 Vermont for helping to coordinate and organize some others to join us tonight. And indeed, that time may take more than 40 minutes, and Sue and I, after some emails today, think that we have some space on our agenda to give more time to that. But let me keep walking through the agenda, and then I'll come back to our subcommittee if we're willing to adjust our agenda. So after we receive that public comment, we have gotten some written feedback on our section. We also presented it to the Climate Council earlier this week, a section on implementation, and it was very well received. I think the feedback we got is largely just small word changes, but we should look at that together and just finalize that tonight. So that's something we're going to spend a little bit of time on. And then if any of you have some additional thoughts on that, we can do that. Then very briefly, there's a feedback on there's a proposal from Climate Access and Rise on sort of the next phase of public engagement. And we've been asked to provide feedback on that proposal. I shared it all with you. And we just want to spend a little bit of time with Jane offering any feedback on that. And then we should talk about what's next for us as a subcommittee. And we have some thoughts about a December meeting and then where we go from here. So that's our agenda today. And again, if you all feel like we can, I think we can certainly probably give until 5 o'clock tonight, at least for public comment, if people feel like we're able to make that adjustment on our agenda. How do subcommittee members feel about that? Thumbs up? Not hearing any no's? Okay.
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Thanks, Kashka. Great. So we'll consider our agenda amended to do public comment until 5 o'clock. And again, if we don't need it, we don't need it. And we can always check back in if we need more time. And with that, I guess I'll just turn to the minutes and say, have we approved the minutes? We work by consensus. So I'm just looking for anyone who has comments or questions. I'm going to give that nice awkward pause. Hearing nothing, I'm going to consider that we've accepted our minutes. Okay. So with that, I think we are ready to move on to the next section of our agenda, which is public engagement. So, and Vanessa, I don't know if you wanted to take a role here to introduce some of the folks you invited. I didn't really talk with you about this, but.
Sure. So thank you so much for creating this space today. This meeting came about when 350 Vermont asked for space to deliver our postcards a while ago to the whole Climate Council, and Sue brought up, the fact that it shouldn't be just about 350 Vermont, which we completely agreed with, and we suggested that there'd be a whole Climate Council meeting dedicated to actually listening to leaders from frontline communities in particular, but the people in Vermont. That whole council meeting, I guess, wasn't possible, but this subcommittee decided to make the space for that, and so we're really grateful for this. As you all have shared, this process hasn't allowed for enough public engagement, and so we're not giving up on that. We know this is a long game, and we're going to need to be engaged beyond December 1st in the legislature and in hearings and through revisions. But we did feel like it was really important for people to get a chance to speak at this point and get on the record. So that's why we're here. And so we reached out to organizations that work with communities that are on the front lines, and so here we are. And I'm going to turn it over. The first person who's going to speak is Chief Don Stevens, and so I know that you're under a tight timeline, Chief Don Stevens. Thank you so much for joining us, and then we will take it from there.
Great. Yeah, thanks. I just came out of a legislative meeting, so it's kind of like, jumping from one Zoom session to another. Now, I noticed just a quick question. I noticed that some of the wording was changed. So this is not testimony. This is just having a conversation, more or less. Okay.
That's right.
Good.
That's right. This is ours. So that's fine. No, that's fine. It's a fair question. So let me frame it up a little bit more, if I can do that as chair in the meeting. I didn't do that very well. This is a subcommittee. This is the Just Transition Subcommittee for the Climate Council. So it's not a hearing. It's just our subcommittee meeting. It is a public meeting and it is recorded. We're really glad you could join us tonight. So thank you.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I want to basically say, because there's only so much you can say in 5 minutes, and I'm kind of long-winded. So I'll try to make it short. We've been here for thousands of years. We have a connection to the land of being good stewards, and we're just asking to be involved because often we're overlooked, and we need to be involved with how we view the world. We don't look at it like this is my land. I have my farm, I get my hay for my cows. We look at it in a more of a stewardship kind of manner, not an ownership. If you're getting hay for your cows, what are you leaving for the wild animals that also eat there? If you are taking, nutrients from the soil for your garden, what are you leaving for the wild pollinators you think are weeds, but they could be medicine or something else? So I think whether it be somebody trying to cut down all of the ash trees, which is doing the work of the ash borer, what are you doing to bring it back? If you cut all the trees down and you don't have seeds or saplings, then how are you gonna just kill an entire species because of you don't want to pay the $150 or whatever to inoculate it? It's a way of viewing the world, whatever it is, I think, and having our voices in those conversations to say, what does that look like, climate change? I mean, we already know that, people are losing touch with their source. And when I mean that, whether it be their environmental source or spiritual source. So as, teenagers, they're not involved with the land as much. So when you're not involved, you don't care about it. It was like when I was growing up on a farm with my grandfather, we got apples and we always had a use for it. We knew they had spots, you cut them out, eat them. But I always use this example is that, if your teenager asks you to go get an apple or a bag of apples, you or somebody goes in and looks over the apples and look for that perfect little apple to put in your bag. And if it had a spot on it, you're going to put it to the side for somebody else. You're not going to take a bad one that's bruised or had a spot on it. And when it gets into the refrigerator, if it happened to get damaged, the teenager is going to do the same thing. They're either going to leave it there for somebody else to eat, they're going to throw it away, or they're going to say, they may cut out the spot, but they probably won't. They'll either put it back or throw it away and say, Mom will just get another bag of apples. So if somebody isn't invested in their source, their environmental source, they don't tend to care about it. And when they don't care about it, it's somebody else's problem. And that's why we've seen the environment go sideways, because it's always somebody else's problem. Somebody else will bring me that bag of apples and I don't care about where it comes from. I don't care what it takes. I don't care how much phosphorus they're putting in. I care about the apple, right? So our way of viewing things is the three-dimensional and how to look at things. And I believe that we would bring a lot of value. So that's what I want to say is that you have to expand the way you look at things and the way you view the world. And I think that if we're going to fight for saving our planet, we have to get people more invested in not only changing the way they view the world from mine to shared resources, like what other things share that same resource that are also alive. Deer can't put chlorine tablets into something. We don't drink all of the sewage that they flush into the brook, when they have an overflow of storm water, but the fish have to deal with that and we eat the fish. So I'm just saying, when it comes to environment, how do we look at it so we're also protecting other beings, which in turn helps us, right? So because we rely on those other things and we have the ability to destroy things, which we've already seen we're doing. So how do we speak for those that can't speak? How do we put things into the perception and the perspective? And how do we get people actually involved in starting to care about the things that they don't normally are involved in? So that's kind of where I'm at. And that's, and how do we work towards those views? Because you can't just throw money at something and still act the same way. All you do is prolong it, right? You don't fix it. You prolong it and you work on the band-aids, but you're not really fixing the root problem. And, we have a unique opportunity with all kinds of money being flushed into the state that we can deal with the way we deal with stormwater. Maybe the excess stormwater is used to help irrigate maybe non-edible plants, or maybe it's used for some other type of, use, or to wash cars or something with, or, I don't know, but I'm just saying is how do we build the infrastructure? How do we build the sustainable jobs? And how do we save our planet in those kind of ways with the influx of money that's coming in? I know darn well, wastewater and stormwater runoff is huge. We have a company too, not us, Nalhegan, but we have citizens that create biochar. That's say keeps phosphorus out of the lake. It helps keep it in the ground, and it's used for many different reasons. Do you think the state even gives us two winks, or even think about how do we incorporate biochar into our plan of saving phosphorus from getting into the water? No. I'm just saying there's many things that could be done with some of the waste, like biochar, the waste wood, turning into something that keeps phosphorus out of the water and put it in the ground and use it for growing. Those are things that we should be looking at, but people don't even pay us any mind or even think about those kind of innovative ways. They just want to do some other things to keep phosphorus out, but it's not keeping it where it should be. It's like treating it. We're going to try to suck it out of the lake and filter it or something. Well, why don't we keep it out of there in the first place? Then we won't have the algae blooms. But I'll get off my soapbox now. But I just wanted to at least impress upon you about how we look at things and what we might be able to do. And just one last thing, and I know I said one of the things I've helped with even South Burlington, when they asked me to come and talk about we're building a bunch of high rises. What do we do? If you guys can also think about, well, how do we build the infrastructure around it so it's good for wildlife, because you're displacing wildlife. So how do you make ponds that can be used for runoff, but it could also be used for wildlife, and maybe you put some fish or some other type of things that would be able to live that's been dispersed. How do you do agroforestry instead of planting a fern tree or a spruce or something like that? Why don't you plant something you could actually eat off from? Like a walnut tree or butternut, or plant some elderberries or blackberry bushes, or How do you make it easier for people to eat? So if people are living in those communities and they can't get out, well, they can plant a garden, they can watch the wildlife, and they can actually eat off the land. And instead of being ornamental shrubs, it could be edible foods. It could be agroforestry type stuff, even in the middle of the city. So we have to think in those manners, because food sovereignty is going to be very important pretty soon, especially in the East Coast, because there's no such thing as summer season. It's fire season out west. Lake Mead is drying up. You know, we're going to be more and more reliant upon New England for food. That's just happening. That's just a reality. So how do we better prepare for that? Or else we're going to be influxed. A lot of people are going to be moving to the East Coast because they can't survive out west. So anyway, now I really will be done.
Thank you, Chief Stevens. Thank you for those reflections. I really appreciate that. And I know others in our subcommittee do as well.
Great. So I think Zoraya Hightower from the Peace and Justice Center was going to speak.
Great. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to give a little bit more of an introduction to myself because I'm not sure that you're as familiar with me as you may be with Chief Stevens, but I'm Zoraya Hightower. I'm the Executive Director of the Peace and Justice Center, nonprofit with over 40 years of experience in Vermont and thousands of members across the state. I'm also a member of the Relief Collective, which is a statewide network created by and for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color to advance racial equity in land, environment, agriculture, and food systems. While I can speak on behalf of the Peace and Justice Center, I cannot speak on behalf of the Relief Collective, although my identity as a member of that body and the conversations I've had in that space will greatly inform what I say today. I also come to you as someone who grew up on a working farm in Oklahoma and as a descendant of former slaves and displaced Native farmers, and I'm an environmentalist by training. All that said, I don't know if my presence here today is a good thing. I don't know if I'm speaking as part of a process that is grounded in solidarity and as part of a good faith effort to discuss what inclusivity looks like, or if I'm speaking to part of a process that would like to check the alley box before adding small tokens of inclusivity to a climate plan. And the truth is that I and other marginalized communities are exhausted at being in these spaces and not knowing what that space is until it's too late. And I know that today, to some extent, I'm probably speaking to at least some members of the choir. I think that a lot of you don't need my help to understand what it would look like to have a just transition. My guess is that after months of this work, alongside organizations like 350 Vermont and Vermont Renews, you have plenty of ideas, probably more than I do. And so, although I would love to uplift the just transition principles that you've embraced and the asks that have been made of you by those folks, I also have a bigger ask, which is that you all have the audacity to do more than whatever it is that you were planning on doing. Because if you let your subcommittee become a procedural checkbox, maybe even a literal sticker or rubber stamp on plans that would have been made anyway, then you'll have failed. If your effort means that you'll push other committees to really center strategy around climate justice, then you've won. And so if your authority only allows you to have the other committees add justice bonuses to get strategies that they were already planning on using to check all the boxes, then I think we failed, at least in my eyes. So I'm hoping we can be ready to fight for a bold and inclusive centerpiece in agriculture and ecosystems and rural resilience and in cross-sector mitigation. I guess my ask is that you know and substantially advocate to change what is being decided in the other rooms. And I hope that you take the time to educate some of your other council members to understand everything you're coming to understand, because I think that education is probably something that needs to happen. So I'll also be brief and happy to stay on for questions on that, but my ask is to not forget the big picture and have the audacity to make sure that we have a climate plan that is unexpectedly just, not expectedly unjust. And with however little power, I understand that this is how policy and politics works is oftentimes you don't actually have all the authority, you don't have all of the power, but whatever power you think you have collectively, you probably have a lot more, and don't regret being part of this process 5 years from now when it's not what you hoped it would be. Thanks.
Thank you. I feel a fire lit under us and in a good way, I think in a way that our subcommittee appreciates and needs to hear affirmation to reach further. So I just want to offer that reflection. Thank you. Are there questions? I failed to offer if there are questions for the chief to offer that opportunity as well. So are there questions for Soraya or the chief? Thank you, Soraya. And thank you, Chief. I want to acknowledge you're not able to stay on as well. Thank you for being with us tonight. Vanessa, I'll turn it back to you. Thank
Okay.
you.
So next we have Ignacio de la Cruz speaking with Migrant Justice and with Marita Canedo interpreting.
Dale, Nacho, cuando quieras.
Ok. Hola, pues mi nombre es José Ignacio y soy trabajador. Bueno, estuve trabajando en los ranchos por más de 5 años y soy parte del Comité de Coordinación de Justicia Migrante y ahora estoy trabajando en carpintería.
So, hello everyone. My name is Ignacio de la Cruz. I used to be a dairy farm worker for 5 years, and now I'm working in construction. I'm also a member of Migrant Justice Coordination Committee.
Ok, bueno, pues ahora les quiero comentar un poco de mi historia y cómo yo pienso que esta lucha igual está impactando o se coordina con la emigración de todo el país.
So I'm going to just share a little bit about my story and also put together how this fight connects with the immigration issues that we face every day.
Sí, bueno, pues donde yo vivo, pues mi familia se dedica a la siembra del maíz, el frijol, la sandía y el melón.
Where I live back home, my family has is farming crops of corn, watermelon, melon,
Sí.
and beans. Sorry.
Entonces, pues antes, pues sí, el campo era como sostenible para mi familia, daba para seguir trabajando, seguir cultivando la tierra, pero cuando entran las grandes compañías como Pemex que empiezan a explotar el petróleo cerca de las costas también, entonces a poner refinerías, todo eso cambió demasiado el clima.
So years ago, farming was sustainable for my family and my town. We could live from our crops and also keep working there. Everything changed when big corporations such as Pemex come and start drilling and putting pipelines, especially in the coast side.
Sí, pues entonces tuvimos que salir primero a trabajar a la ciudad porque pues el campo ya no era sostenible para mi familia, para pagar las deudas, seguir pagando como las máquinas para seguir cosechando. Entonces decidimos trabajar en la ciudad, pero igual pues yo y mi familia no tenemos demasiado estudio, entonces no era como un trabajo muy mejor que el que teníamos y pues no podíamos ni pagar como renta, luz, agua. Entonces tuvimos que decidir en dejar nuestra tierra e emigrar hasta acá.
So me and my family had to migrate to the city to find jobs because farming wasn't sustainable anymore. Things won't grow up in our land. But at the same time, living in the city was very challenging because we didn't have enough studies to get big jobs. And so money was short. We couldn't pay like basic services, not even rent, electricity, or any other bills. So we kind of been forced to migrate here to this country.
Y pues cuando llegamos acá, pues igual pues nos topamos con la realidad también que pues acá igual las casas son muy muy pésimas, como cuando uno renta también, hay muchas plagas, muchas chinches como cucarachas, ratones, no están las casas en buenas condiciones, ahora en invierno hay demasiado frío.
So even coming here, we face challenges with housing. We ended up living in housing infested with pests, bed bugs, rats, cockroaches. And now that winter is coming, you know, they are cold. There is no heating system.
Sí, pues esto está pasando como en la mayoría de los ranchos y ahora pues que muchas personas que se han salido de los ranchos y están como aventurándose a trabajar en restaurantes, en hoteles y pues tienen que rentar también en la ciudad y pues igual en las ciudades se está pasando también esto. Entonces todas las personas como de bajos recursos pues no tienen como esta capacidad de poder pagar una casa mejor.
So these are the conditions in dairy farms that I face myself and seeing happening, keep happening. And some of us, you know, are adventurous to work in different industries like hotels, restaurants, construction, etc., which means we have to move to the city, leave the farm, and find to rent a place. And we are people with low income. So finding a place to rent is very difficult unless you find a place with really bad conditions as well.
Sí, pues tenemos como el problema del medio ambiente que pues ahora prácticamente las personas que trabajan en los restaurantes, en carpintería como nosotros debemos de tener un auto para llegar a nuestro trabajo y pues sabemos que estamos contaminando también el medio ambiente y pues una de las otras cosas que está haciendo esta organización es como pedir transporte, tener un transporte público. Entonces, como eso es como dejarías de usar un carro o los trabajadores dejaríamos de usar un vehículo personal y podríamos usar el transporte. Así ayudaríamos al medio ambiente, estarías gastando menos dinero ahora con la inflación de la gasolina. Entonces, ayudaría mucho a la organización también, como a los migrantes como nosotros.
So understanding that getting into these new jobs in restaurants and construction, paying rent, we have to drive to our workplace. And that means we are contaminating more because we need to buy a car, we need to go places, and with all the climate crisis, we are polluting and giving our footprint to the disaster. So, you know, part of what I hear you're asking is public transportation. And I think public transportation is an idea that will really help our communities, you know, to kind of close the circle, also paying so much prices for gas. We just talk about how the oil companies are exploiting our countries and force us to migrate. And then we have to pay for gas here to go to our workplace. It's something that is good to take into account to have really like a plan for public transportation that will help our immigrant communities, you know, and the people that have been forced to come here.
Bueno, y pues gracias por invitarnos a estar aquí. Pues igual estamos con todos ustedes en esta lucha y pues gracias por lo que están haciendo todos. Y pues es bueno tener un mejor medio ambiente sano.
So thank you everyone for inviting us to be part of this conversation. You know, we are here together in this struggle, and yeah, it's important that we keep the conversation. So thank you for the space, and yeah, hope to keep hearing from you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for sharing your story. Any questions? All right, we'll keep going. Thanks, Vanessa.
I don't know if Nando Jaramila is on the call. Nando, are you there? Okay, and I know Mishka couldn't make it because she got sick, but I'll turn it over to Grace Palmer of Sunrise.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Grace here. Thank you so much, first of all, to the council for making this space available. I guess first, I really wanted to uplift the asks that 350 Vermont has put forward to the Climate Council. We really believe that the process behind all of this is as, if not more important than the outcome, and that we really have an opportunity with the Climate Action Plan to build justice and the interest of the people into the process, into the plan itself. So I'm speaking on behalf of Sunrise Montpelier. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Sunrise, but it's a youth-led movement to combat climate change and create millions of good jobs in the process. And it's a youth-led movement. So I guess as I was sort of reflecting on the mission of Sunrise, what it means to me, my position in Vermont, I was thinking really about what it means to be a young person in Vermont and what this plan means for young people in this state. I'm from Vermont. I grew up in Stowe, have lived here most of my life aside from college. And I love Vermont so much. But there was always this sense, for me at least growing up, that Vermont is a lovely place to grow up, and it's a lovely place to raise a family. But it's not necessarily a place to stay and to sort of like make a living as a young person, as a young working person specifically. And I've really experienced this as I've gotten older. I'm back here in Vermont working. I work in sort of a sustainability adjacent field, but so many people from my home community and from sort of the broader Burlington community, that's where I'm based now, really are struggling to sort of find those pathways and those opportunities in Vermont. And I've experienced this sort of in the past year of living here. My two roommates who I spent the past year with were here for sort of the winter and then eventually left because there just wasn't opportunity. And that's, you know, a small sample size, but it feels also true of so many people in my life from Stowe and through the present. There's sort of the sense that you have to leave Vermont to go to a place like New York or DC or Boston or the West Coast where there's opportunity. And that feels particularly true of the climate and sustainability fields in Vermont. And it feels important to say that I say all of this as somebody with multiple privileges, and that it's so much harder and so much more precarious as somebody, as a person with marginalized identities to sort of figure out how to make a living here and how to find stability here. So that's sort of a reflection on what it means to be a young person figuring out how to live and work in Vermont right now. But I guess looking at the Climate Action Plan, I really see this at its very best as being an opportunity to totally transform this state, to transform so many parts of this state. And to echo Zarai, I just want to say that that means being bold and that means being audacious in this plan. And just looking at the youth, the voices of young people that have come forward over the past several years, we know that nothing less than the very boldest plan will be enough at this point. So I want to add my voice to that chorus and just really uplift what has been said here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Grace. Appreciate that. Any questions for Grace? Yeah, Chris.
Grace, thanks for being here with us and sharing your perspective with us. One of the things that the council's been discussing is just the sheer volume of jobs that's going to have to be created around everything from weatherization to electricians to line persons to just all kinds of especially trade jobs. And they can pay really well. It's not necessarily the most, it gets, I mean, I came, my family was in the building trades and I did some of that myself before I went off to college. And frankly, I learned some reasons why I probably didn't want to stay in the trades. But I guess what I'm wondering from your perspective is, and the other pieces with our aging population, we have owners of companies, which are frankly also the teachers for the new tradespersons. You know, they're retiring, they're about to go out of business, not just because, you know, it's physically taxing work, it's hard work, and a lot of them are ready to wrap it up. And so we're also about to lose that pool of teachers. And I just wonder if, and I'm sure there are going to be other jobs that are going to require college degrees and other things. I'm just curious what your perspective is, though, on these and on these trade jobs that should be created, and what's needed to. Do you think those are jobs that people will want? You know, among your peers. And I'm not trying to put everything on you. I'm not trying to put all the generational burden on you. Just your perspective as Grace Palmer. Do you have any perspective on that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. That's a really good one. I can't speak as somebody who has a lot of familiarity with these sort of trade technical jobs that you're referring to. But I do think that there is and will continue to be demand for that kind of work here. I think across the board in those fields, certainly, and in so many others, there's just a desire to be able to live well, to be paid well for your work, to have benefits, to have paid time off, et cetera, et cetera. And I think those are the pieces that can feel really precarious, especially for young people, working class people, poor people in Vermont, sort of having those basic needs accounted for at work. This is a place with a really high cost of living and sort of lower than average salaries, I think, in many industries. Again, I'm a young professional, so I don't have a ton of experience in the workplace in Vermont, but it does feel like those are really sought after benefits and sort of attributes of a workplace that a lot of people that I know and that I have heard of don't have good access to.
Thank you, Grace.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Vanessa.
Thanks. So now we have Nando Jaramillo from Moon and Stars. Nando, are you able to join us now? I see that you're there. All right. Why don't we go to Graham from rural Vermont, and we'll finish with Nando.
Hey folks, my name is Graham Unangst Roofnacht. I'm the policy director at Rural Vermont, and I'm a small farmer here in Marshfield. And thank you all for inviting us here today. Thanks for everyone who spoke before me. For those who don't know, Rural Vermont is a 35-year-old agricultural organization in the state. Our mission is to organize, educate, and advocate in collaboration with local and global movements to strengthen the social, ecological, and economic health of the agrarian communities that connect us all. I'm gonna try to run through a bunch of stuff. We've, as an organization, been trying to monitor as best we can the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee. We've submitted 16 pages of public comment and tried to provide comment on the record at meetings when we were able to attend. To give you all some back information, the farmers, as you've heard today already in the call, farmers, farm workers, and land-based workers are on the front lines of climate change locally and globally. The average income for farmers in the United States annually runs in the negative numbers. My most recent memory from the USDA was around negative $1,400. This is a demographic highly vulnerable to mental health challenges, to suicide, to issues related to healthcare, childcare, elder care access, and affordability. And we also know that there are significant disparities in who has deeded rights to agricultural land and land in general, who has access to skills, education, and capital. And these disparities, disinvestments, and violent removals must be addressed. And I'm gonna just try to run through some sort of high points and observations from our time at the Climate Council. I'll start with the process concerns, including how and when public comment is included, and how the Climate Council and its subcommittees are going to be accountable to public comment. How are different subcommittee recommendations and processes going to be treated by the council itself and the legislature? You know, we've heard from folks in the subcommittees, in particular ag and ecosystems, that they are already overburdened, undercompensated, on an unrealistic timeline, especially when growing at the speed of trust and with the equity considerations and justice considerations we're all trying to move with, and that they don't know what assures that comments are actually read and addressed. So like Zariah and others, you know, we absolutely sometimes question the value of showing up in this space, and ask these subcommittees, which are really seeing their task as far more than enabling the legislation and truly centered in equity and justice, to do that work, to educate and influence the other committees and legislators and other folks involved as best you can. Some of our other overarching concerns is the prioritization of the greenhouse gas emissions reductions from what starts as a very deeply flawed analysis, over equitably meeting community and human needs as relates to adaptation and resiliency. We must be able to produce food, medicine, fibers, et cetera, we need here and regionally. We must be giving people equitable access from a very early age to foundations in ecological literacy and traditional ecological knowledge in agroecology. Chief Don mentioned agroforestry. You know, food insecurity is already extremely present in Vermont, in particular during the pandemic, as is poverty and poor access to housing and many basic needs. A climate action plan which does not address the deep and real needs of the people living here and who will be coming here via climate migration, those who are already here via climate migration, will not only fail to address our collective future, but it will further divide our communities on the issue of climate change and the faith in our elected governments as we're seeing. We would really like to see, we have concerns about the prioritization of greenhouse gas emissions versus other forms of environmental destruction as well. We really feel like this needs to be looked at holistically. We can't reduce this whole question to carbon or the carbon emissions, from PFOAs to plastics, et cetera. All of these environmental and health concerns must be addressed holistically. We're going to be robbing from Peter to pay Paul, as the saying goes. We do see the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee making efforts to do so, to talk about some of these other factors, and we appreciate that. In terms of systems change and analysis, we see a lot of efforts at mitigation versus transformation. There's also talked about earlier, you know, we need livable communities where we can work close to home and have accessible public transit. That needs to be prioritized over the electrification of vehicles. We need public banking. We need universal healthcare and childcare and elder care. We have the system of cheap globalized food and exploited labor, as opposed to a local and regionalized food system founded in just livelihoods and food sovereignty. So there's all these opportunities to really make change, but we can't just skirt around the edges. Where do human needs related to climate really fit in? And again, that's the healthcare, the childcare, the elder care, the equitable access to and affordability of housing, and transportation, which we heard folks speak to already. Equitable access to land and the skills and relationships to grow food, medicine, fiber. One thing we're seeing missing from the plan is where's the inclusion of the economic and financial sectors, from our investment in Toronto Dominion and Enbridge Line 3 to the Vermont Pension Investment Committee's $100 million investment in TIAA's global farmland subsidiary Nuveen, which seeks to buy farmland around the world, taking that land away from local communities and their resources. The language itself, you know, net zero is talked about, but that's not actually a real concept. It leads us closer to climate catastrophe while corporate polluters are given an out to continue polluting. We hear loud and clear from our national and global allies, from La Via Campesina to the Indigenous Environmental Network, that we must reduce emissions at their source, keep fossil fuels in the ground, and increase equitable support for land use and other essential systems which meet human and ecological needs. So again, we're seeing other language like climate smart ag, net zero, nature-based solutions, and we're not trying to cancel folks who are using that language or anything like that, but we need to identify how the language we use signals to others and where it came from. Because internationally, it's very clear that this language, climate smart ag, net zero, nature-based solutions, they're alternatives to language that have been used by civil society organizations for decades, agroecology, food sovereignty. And they appropriate those terms. They take a small amount of their meaning and they depoliticize them, take all the socio-political meaning out of them. And it's really critical that we recognize that we are participating in this and understand some of that greater context. There's been some talk about how this work moves going forward and an agency-based climate body. And our comment there would be, we need a civil society-led body that's adequately funded by the government There can be an agency-based one or an interagency-based one, but we absolutely need that civil society-based one. There's so much more that could be said. I'll leave it there, and I really appreciate you all taking the time today to hear from us. I'll try to send in our 16 pages of thoughts and recommendations as well.
Thank you, Graham. Yeah, I would welcome that. I'm happy to distribute to our subcommittee. Thank you. Are there questions for Graham? Yeah, Chris.
Amanda had her hand up first. I think she can go.
Go
Or
for
she
it.
just take that.
Oh, sorry, that was a clap, not a hand up.
Okay. Hey, Graham, I hope you don't mind. I just finding out who everybody, just find some background. Are you still on the board of the National Family Farm Coalition?
Yes, we serve on the board and the executive committee of the National Family Farm Coalition, and through that, we're also members of the Via Campesina, and probably be pursuing organizational membership in and of itself soon.
The reason in a former life, I was the federal policy coordinator for the National Campaign for Sustainable Ag on the 2002 Farm Bill, and worked really closely back then with the National Family Farm Coalition. That was back when Kathy Ozer was director, and back in my days with Southern Sustainable Ag Working Group, work with Ben Burkett, Shirley Sherrod, does all those good folk, Rural Coalition. One of the big concerns I have is that a lot of the proposals that came out of ag and ecosystems require probably federal farm bill support that currently doesn't exist. And in my opinion, the New England ag, Vermont ag, Northeast ag, Eastern mountain agricultural ag needs to have a much stronger voice in the federal policy promulgation. I don't know how, it's been a while since I've been out of it, but we can talk offline sometime, but I'm just curious to what extent you feel like the Northeast is having a sufficiently strong voice to, frankly, in some cases, have to counter Southern, Midwestern, and Western interests, because too often the policies, including national forest policy, is just driven so much by the integrators, the folk who are basically consolidating ag. It has more to do with the producers than the actual, not the producers, the processors and the actual farmers. And would love to get your take sometime on that kind of federal perspective, so that Vermont farmers can get more resources. Not that we should be dependent on the feds, but to me, we need a farm bill that's going to work better for us than against us.
Graham, if you have a short response, you're welcome to do that, but it sounds like that's a much longer conversation as well.
It is a bigger conversation. All I would say is the intersection of federal policy and how it can enable or disable the work in Vermont, international policy as well. I'm not sure if you folks were listening to the COP, but it's a pretty disappointing process in a lot of ways. I just learned that military emissions have been disincluded since the Kyoto Protocol from any greenhouse gas emissions inventory globally. But yeah, I think relying on the Farm Bill is not a good idea, but working to address it is. And that's the value of these coalitions, where we're sitting at the same table with the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, with Dakota Rural Action, with these organizations that are member-based across the country, led by all different types of communities that are working together. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Kashka, you have a question. Go ahead.
I'm not sure if I can leave my camera on, so I'm just going to turn it off just in case. I just wanted to say thank you so much to the speakers.
So we have one more speaker.
Oh, we do. You know what?
do.
I'm gonna hold off.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Hold off.
Great. Yeah, we're not done with public comment. Thanks, Kashka, and thanks, Vanessa, for jumping in.
Yeah.
And I might just pause for a second and say, subcommittee members, I think that we have time on our agenda to continue past 5 o'clock, and I wonder if you'd give me the leniency to push this to 5:10 to make sure we have space for all of our speakers. Do folks have concerns about that?
Well, we still have half an hour for a discussion of the climate access proposal.
We have 15 minutes scheduled for that. Yes, I won't cut that time away. You would like more time for that discussion?
I just misread that. Oh yeah, I did. I have some serious concerns about that, but so just flagging that.
Okay. I won't cut time away from that. I'll keep in mind we might need more. I don't think we're going to need a lot for the implementation edits since we really didn't get any feedback. So otherwise, with Iris's comments in mind, people feel comfortable continuing a little longer. Great. Thanks, Vanessa. Yeah, if you want to go ahead and introduce.
So Nando, you want to?
Yes, hi. My name is Nando Jaramillo. I have a project here in Vermont called Moon and Stars. We grow corn and we make arepas and empanadas. And we try to use regenerative practices to grow our corn and try to create like a food system that brings all this cultural knowledge back to Vermont using, regenerative practices to create a food system that kind of aligns with our mission statement, which is to educate people about environmental issues through the arts and the arepa making process. I feel like we should talk about like land access to projects that are really involved in the community, and I don't know, have some kind of liaisons between the people that really are hands-on in the community, and be able to help those projects that are working really down in the grassroots line, with the community. I feel like land access is one that we should address.
Nando, your camera is free.
State, and also the football, the overhead in this just the to have a place where there's your food, or like access to like a hub, a kitchen hub where people can have.
Nando, I'm wondering if you could turn off your camera so that, because your sound is cutting out.
Oh, it is? I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, it's okay.
What should I do? Stop video? Okay.
Yeah.
So I feel like even though I've been very fortunate to
That is one of the challenges with this forum for engagement. Nando, I'm sorry. I think, go ahead and try again.
I'm cutting out.
Yeah, you're cutting out.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Try again. Please try again.
Maybe I try like this, because I had. Is that better?
Yes. That's
much better. Okay, cool. Thank you. Maybe I can turn the camera on now. Okay, hi. So yeah, I don't know, for some reason I gravitated here in Vermont, and we started this project, and it's been hard, but I feel fortunate that people have connected with us and have like given moral support, not money support, but moral support. But I think that, yeah, there should be like the organizations that have access to all these funds should have people that are really connected with the community and find out what the real projects that are helping the community build this food system, and so access to land and the infrastructure overhead, it's so high, and right now everything is getting out of control in the prices. I don't know what's going on, but like a box of paper plates that I would buy for like $60 is now like $100. Like so I don't know. We have to figure out a way to help all these little organizations that are trying to do good things here in the state. And yeah, another problem is housing. We're trying to work on this project here where we're trying to acquire a building where we can give housing as an incentive for them to work with us. And because it's so hard to find labor here, I had to hire like 12-year-old kids to help me during the summer because I couldn't find nobody to help, because I don't know, housing is really expensive. People are in these desperate situations where they need money to pay all this living situation here. It's hard to so I don't know. I don't know how we're gonna handle all this inflation that's happening in the last 6 months, you know?
Thank you. Yes, no, thank you. I think a lot of folks are feeling exactly what you're speaking to. Thank you for being here. Are there questions for Nando?
Nobody. Okay.
Nobody. Thank you. But thanks for being here. Vanessa, is there anyone else that you've invited?
No, nobody else I've invited, but there may be other people.
There was another thing that I thought that I feel like our distribution situation, there must be some way that we can have more accessibility to distribution in a way that benefits more the farmer and the people that are making the food, because I feel like there's not like a balance where or help those distribution companies, subsidize them in some way for them to be able to help farmers more, because I feel like farmers lose so much in the distribution process that it's something that has to have like some kind of transparency and in a way to create like something that we really find out what the price of sustainable food is, you know? Because I feel like the market here in Vermont is very small because of the density, but to have access to those markets where they're more densified is very difficult for farmers to connect with that, you know? So if we could have some support in the distribution realm, I think that could be very helpful to all farmers and people in the food industry here.
Thank you, Nando, for adding that point at the end. Yeah. All right, this is a public comment period, and there may be others here tonight as well that want to add to the public comments. So I just want to open it up to others. Or anyone else? I see Indra and Kashka. Well, Kashka's always here, but Indra's here tonight, and I know you all have been doing some great public engagement work. So anyone else? Okay, then with that, I'm going to keep us moving along on our agenda. But again, I just want to reflect. I'm sort of watching the chat box a little bit, not doing a great job calling out the comments in the chat box. I apologize about that. But a lot there, and a lot of thank yous and appreciations I'm seeing from our subcommittee members for all that able to make time tonight to join us and share your stories, your experiences, and lift those up. And I think it's been really, really wonderful to hear that, and also light a fire under us to keep reaching, and really appreciate that. Yeah, Sue, you have your hand up.
Hi, I just wanted to echo the appreciation for the folks who have come to share with us tonight. And, you know, I do want to reflect that, you know, there are several people put some ambitions in front of us for the climate action plan. And I do want to say that, you know, a lot has been begun with what we're calling the first iteration of the plan. And because there is a December 1st deadline to submit something to the legislature, we are moving forward quite quickly with that. So I want to make sure, Marion, you can put something in the chat with, what's the best way for people to look at our work. But I want you to also know that this is a first iteration, and we foresee a lot more work ahead, where perhaps some more of your comments and concerns raised tonight might still come into play. So I don't want you to feel like anything that you don't see means that it's a failure. We are beginning this process. We had a very intense deadline. We will continue engagement and revisions. So I just sort of wanted to put that out there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sue. And I do want to keep us moving. Kashka, did you want to add something quickly?
Yep, quickly. Sorry, guys. I just wanted to say thank you so much for those who spoke. And as you mentioned, Sarah, both Indra and I have some comments also from the low and moderate income communities and the frontline communities. But I think that a lot has been covered. And what I'm hearing is that we really need education. We need to have a balance that exists with all things in order to achieve a true balance, and understand the source, which will show its true value. So the source being all of us. And in addition to that, what I hear is that we need to keep corporations accountable. And I think this is something that we need to continue to do. And as Climate Council and as a subcommittee, the corporations need to be held accountable to the same standards, if not more so, than we hold individual citizens who bear the brunt of everything. And obviously our greed has caused this issue, and our insatiable appetite has created this situation. And right now we have an opportunity to do better. So this is huge. And just as Sue was mentioning, this is just the beginning, and we are going to continue to listen to voices in order to help them in the implementation process. So thank you so much. And thank you to 350 Vermont for bringing everyone on board. Thank you.
Thanks, Kashka. Okay. All right, turning our attention. So I am gonna share my, oh, yes, Jules, I'm sorry, I just saw your hand, Jules. Did you have a public comment? Okay. Jules, I don't know if you know how to unmute yourself. You're welcome to make a public comment.
We keep hearing about needing to educate, and I totally agree. It's one of my big pet peeves is we don't educate people on anything. But how are we going to do that? We need to start with our younger people who are in school. How do we get in there to do that? I'm not too confident that the boards would let people go in. And then what do we do in the community? How do we educate in the community? We had a gardening project here in Bethel, a community garden, come and work in a little bit. It wasn't big, but it was getting a lot of food. Come and work, and we can show you how to grow your food and how to, all of that goes around with that. I don't know that many people came. Well, the ones who came, it was very good for. And the extra food went to the local food shelf. But how do we educate is my big ask.
Yes, that's a big ask and a big question, and unfortunately one we won't have time to dig into today, but thank you for lifting that up before we move on. Thank you. Anyone else on public comment before we give ourselves till 5:10 if we needed it? Okay. Thank you. All right, so oops, I'm not going to mute myself. Oh my God, I can't multitask. Okay. So as part of our planning for tonight, I sent back out to you our section of the implementation of Vermont. So there's a section of the Climate Action Plan called Implementing Vermont's Climate Action Plan. And that section includes our section that we wrote. Thank you, everyone. That is called, what is it called? It's called Just Transition and Equity Considerations in Implementation. So we sent out that whole section so that you could see where our section fit within the context of that whole sort of chapter, for lack of a better word. And we presented, as I said, at the Climate Council. I don't remember which day this week. I think it was well received. And then we did get some comments back that I just wanted to review with folks today. For the most part, my read on these comments was that they were mostly about cleaning up the language, just tightening it, making it easier to read, right? Which sometimes when you're writing things and editing it, it's nice to have somebody who hasn't seen multiple versions kind of offer you, like, you get your point across a little bit better if you just kind of shift your, your language around or your sentence structure. So most of the comments I think were like that, but some of them were a little bit broader. And so I just wanted to kind of pull those up tonight and kind of walk through them and see what folks thought. I don't anticipate we need a lot of time to discuss this tonight, but I am going to share my screen and walk through them before we finalize them. Jane, I see you popped on camera. Did you want to add something?
Nope, I just didn't realize I didn't have my video on. So evening, everybody.
It's okay. That's all right.
Oh, I almost turned.
There we go. Can folks see that? Okay. And I will try to make it a little bit bigger just because I know it's hard to see. How is that? Okay. And I can't see you now because I don't know how to, the Zoom thing, suddenly I can't see anybody. Okay. I really can't see anybody. I don't know why that did that. Okay. So I think, again, I think this suggestions of wording is really just adding clarity and shifting the way that it's without really changing substance. Happy to have anyone else just pause for a moment and help folks read that section. I know it's very hard to read and look on the fly, and we can talk about process, but I did think it was important that this group had a chance to look at the feedback. Okay. So again, just clarity. What we're really talking about is the weatherization of Vermont's housing stock. Modernization was sort of a less clear term. Maybe folks disagree, but generally felt like a lot of these were just adding some clarity and context. I'm not even looking, am I looking at the right? I'm not looking at the right section. I was looking at the right section. I'm so sorry. Here's the right section. Oh my goodness, you guys.
Sarah, this is Sue, and I'm sorry I can't really read it, but I just wanted to know, is it substantive suggestions, or are they mostly kind of more editorial in nature? If there's something substantive, it might be helpful if you would read it so we could.
I will read the substantive part. Sorry. This is the stuff that I think is less substantive that I'm just kind of scrolling through, giving people a chance to look at, if you can see it. Apologies. Okay, so this section right here, there were a couple of comments that I think were really helpful from Julie Moore. This one right here is just that we need to really, before we talk about incorporating the guiding principles into the equity impact assessment tool, we really do need to talk with Susanna Davis, Vermont's racial equity director. And so I've reached out to Susanna to ask about that, but I think with that in mind, not having had the chance to discuss that with her, kind of changes this language to encourage incorporation of makes a lot more sense. I'm not sure that is a substantive change from saying like incorporate it, like do this versus encourage incorporation. And again, I think that's okay, given that we haven't actually talked with Susanna Davis about that as well.
I agree. That seems like a fine way to address that.
again, I'm just kind of scrolling through some things that I think are less substantive. Again, another one here is we hadn't talked with Vermont's Chief Performance Officer, but I think we can still say what we wanted to say about implementing monitoring and assessment process that really is about accountability, and to leave that in here in a strong way without necessarily calling out it specifically being Vermont's Chief Performance Officer or specifically being the Science and Data Committee. And I think, again, it's a substantive change, but I think one that's probably more appropriate given that we haven't had conversations with those other groups. If folks agree. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. Sorry that I started with the first section that wasn't even ours. Oh my gosh, it's kind of day, you guys. So again, and I scrolled through a lot of those edits very quickly, but mostly because I felt like they weren't really substantive edits. They were more just like tightening language, change kind of stuff. And those other two pieces that I called out, I think were really just about recognizing that, making a recommendation without talking with those people or groups, we might just want to kind of reframe it just a little bit. So if you all agree, we're happy to make those changes and then give them back to folks, and we can call it a final version. Jane, go ahead. I can see you're wanting to say something. Do you want to say something, Jane? Oh, okay. Anyone else? Kelly, please.
On that first substantive edit, I do want to make sure, I understand the reasoning, but I do want to make sure that we're not leaving wiggle room where equity does not have to be incorporated into other things that we're doing. If we have the opportunity to say, please, you need to incorporate equity considerations into what we're doing going forward, if we can say it strongly, I would like to do it. But I do understand that not having talked to the right people at the right time. So I don't know if there's a way to make it a little bit stronger than encourage, but not.
Yeah. So.
But yeah.
Oh,
does that make sense?
Sorry, Kelly. Yeah, no, it does. So let me just clarify. So I think that there's no softening of the language in general around the ongoing use of the guiding principles assessment questions during legislative rulemaking, ongoing implementation, monitoring, and assessment. That statement is still in there really clearly. And I think, in fact, probably a little bit more clear because monitoring assessment is more clear. This was really a specific recommendation that we said, okay, and the executive branch uses this equity impact assessment tool. And so really that tool should be integrated or incorporated with our guiding principles assessment questions. And so I think that one is just shifting a little bit the language to recognize, well, okay, that sounds good, but maybe we should talk with the person who created that tool first. So I think it still speaks to what you're saying. We didn't really change any of the language around the generally kind of strong language around needing to do it. Does that make sense? Am I being more clear? Okay. Great, Abby.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in to say that I have shared this committee's guiding principles probably in a few earlier drafts ago. Actually, I guess it was the final draft that was reviewed by the Climate Council as part of a conversation of whether that could be included into the equity assessment, impact assessment tool. And not that we have to go back to the original language, but Susanna was open and I think felt like there was real opportunity there. What the process would be for that approval and the whole incorporation effort, I can't speak to, but Susanna will not be new to this concept. We've discussed it previously.
Thank you, Abby. That's helpful to know. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Then great. I guess I'm just looking to confirm. Oh, Kelly, is that a new hand?
Oh, I just wanted to, I guess my question is, if Susanna Davis gets back and says, yes, we want the original language, is that an opportunity for us to go back to say, do it rather than encourage? If we hear it in time.
I think that's fine. And I did reach out to her specifically too with this. And so if I hear back from her, I'm happy to shift that back if people agree. Chris.
Sorry, trying to manage this tiny wee dog. The only thing is, I don't know how much latitude Susanna has to make, unilaterally make this decision. I don't want to burden her with a decision she can't make.
That's fair.
What's
That's
that?
fair. I said, that's fair. That's true.
So to Kelly's point, I'm not sure if it necessitates a language change. I guess just for us to recognize she can only do so much. She's got other folk above her. We're ultimately going to have to tell her what's allowable, right? So, yeah.
I honestly, I don't think it's about not wanting to incorporate tools. I see everyone being aligned to do that. It's an administrative efficiency. I think it's just about like, it's going to take some work to figure out how to do that. It's
Right.
going to have to go through its process. Yeah. Okay. All right. So with that being said, looking for this group to affirm moving forward with these edits as presented. And are we feeling good about that? And there may, just to be honest with everyone, there may be additional proofing or copy editing that happens on the document that happens to the document as a whole, right? And that's okay too. Okay, great. All right, then I was right when I said that we weren't going to need that huge amount of time. And I just want to acknowledge Sue has had to leave us. She has a board meeting tonight. It's an evening where she has a conflict. And Kashka, I just want to also acknowledge how darn positive and encouraging you always are, because I really appreciate that. It is a big effort to move forward all of this work with our committee. Thank you. So now we do actually have some more time to talk about our public engagement next steps, which is great because Iris, thank you for flagging that you felt like that would need some more time. So we sent out one, which is sort of like a 1.5 page proposal. Hopefully folks have that in front of them. That was sort of a next phase of engagement that RISE and Climate Access proposed. And Jane, did you want to say a little bit about this to frame it up for us? Because you were looking for us to provide some feedback. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. My understanding for tonight was, but I could easily pivot from this understanding, was that we were going to tease up and present the components of public engagement as presented for December 1st through March as put forward in that proposal. And then our hope and anticipation as you all think about your role as a subcommittee and next steps, that we would revisit it substantively at the December 16th meeting in order to talk about refinements. None of this, except for the initial component of the press release and the summary of the CAP, will happen before the new year. So I just want to preface that. So happy, I walked through this with the Climate Council, and I'm happy to do that briefly and share it on screen and just talk through the steps. And recognize and appreciate that Climate Access, and this is within the scope of the contract that we currently have. It is not intended to be the inclusive of all engagement and outreach that we have, but based on the contract that we currently have in place with Climate Access and RISE to support engagement and outreach after as a rollout of the initial plan, this is the refined scope since the original contract is in place. So there's no intention to do a different contract or contract amendment at this time. So I do just want to say that this is one component with our contractor as we envisioned and worked with many of you to put that contract in place at the beginning of this process. So
thanks, Jane. Yeah, I do think since we do have some time tonight, I would think it would be helpful for you to walk through it, and then we'll have some time for discussion around it. And Jane's right, we are planning to tee up a larger conversation at a December meeting that this group has not yet agreed to, but if you're willing to spend more time talking about engagement and to also hear about some work that Carrie and folks at Carrie, where are you? Department of Environment. I can't remember. It's a long day.
Environmental conservation.
Thank you. I was going to say that, and it just wasn't sounding right coming out of my mouth. Department of Environmental Conservation. And so Carrie, if we have time tonight, she can speak to that a little bit, but we thought we could definitely have some more time at a December meeting to look at that. But Jane, let's start with what's in front of us, and I think it'll be a good conversation. Thanks.
That's great. So Climate Access and RISE, you'll all remember, are the consultants who have worked with us throughout to develop the public engagement plan, as well as handle the engagement that we did largely around September to garner feedback on the how, the actions for the climate action plan. So this, we've been talking to them, understanding what we will and won't be able to deliver on December 1st and what our expectations are based on that delivery of the climate action plan, how we could have authentic public engagement, recognizing that there'll be a lot of moving pieces throughout the winter, largely with the legislature already moving into taking action on the initial plan, and recognizing that there'll also be components of work that will be ongoing with the council still to continue and advance work that wasn't fully fleshed out for this first climate action plan. And appreciating that there will also be a revised iteration of the climate action plan at some point in the future, which is not clear yet to me on when the council will direct us to revise the CAP in any substantive way. Appreciating that, you know, we have to do it within 4 years, but I certainly think we'll have a new climate action plan or an updated iteration of the climate action plan sooner than 4 years. But that we know that, that there is no exact date yet. So we want to be welcoming input, but also recognizing that the process is somewhat fluid after December 1st. And then also speaking to how Vermonters can engage and how see themselves in climate action themselves is the other main component of the way we've been thinking about how to frame outreach and engagement, and really thinking about the personal action pathway and how Vermonters themselves can help make climate action a reality. So these are all components of their contract that's already in place, and we were trying to put a finer lens on what components and that would be a high priority and when in the timeline, and then also speaking to how they would engage with this subcommittee as well as the council in the coming months. So first and foremost, for December 1st, anticipating that we will adopt a plan on December 1st, we transferred all of the draft files to them. Marion did that today onto a Google Drive for Climate Access and RISE to have sort of the draft as a whole today to start to work on a high level summary of the climate action plan to use with outreach and engagement. So that'll be a 2 to 4 page document that sort of summarizes the high points, likely very much in line with what the executive summary will be for the climate action plan. And they'll also work to develop a press release that will be ready to go out on that afternoon of December 1st. Along the same lines, there'll be a social media strategy that we'll use. They helped us develop components of social media that we were able to use through A&R outlets as well as through partner outlets to promote the climate action plan as it's released. Some of the components that really fell short this fall, largely due to time, was our capacity to work with partner organizations as well as this subcommittee to activate your networks. We have money in the contract to do this, as well as, I hope, more time to really thoughtfully think about how we can support you all and the work that you do with your networks, as well as other priorities from the council to not only stand up our own engagement events, but really have a targeted presence in helping and supporting you all, as well as bringing others in to help facilitate and discuss the climate action plan and communicate it to the public. So that's a real focus with all of you, I think, as we start to think about what that looks like in December when Climate Access and RISE hope to join your December 16th meeting to really start to plan that out. We will not do any in-person meetings this winter around the rollout of the climate action plan. Right now, we only have budgeted 3 online meetings. and really thinking about a multi-pronged approach on how we share the plan. And this is what I was trying to get at earlier around the different sort of swim lanes in which the work will still be happening. So we'll want to speak to the legislative process and activate people to get involved and speak with their legislators and sort of educate them on how to engage in the legislative process around the actions in the CAP. We'll want to speak to the personal action pathway and the ongoing work of the Climate Council so that they can see that the council is still continuing with good work and making progress on areas that we fell short on in the initial climate action plan. All of this would be the goal of gathering feedback for future iterations of the CAP and really thinking about how we do better and bringing that feedback in this time and using it really well to inform the direction of future CAP climate action plans. We also have the opportunity to set up and run an online engagement platform. It's been framed to me that it was a deliberative polling platform that Climate Access and RISE have used with success in other processes like this. Ours, because it is not a draft plan, it's an initial plan, it's a little more nuanced for this, because you could imagine if it was a draft plan that you would put it out there and you would use a deliberative polling platform to engage with Vermonters to understand in real time. They can see how other Vermonters are raising and ranking policy ideas coming forward in the plan. In this case, we want to use it more as a communication strategy to get people to really understand how the different actions add up, how they all come together in a holistic strategy, and then also sort of garner where we have capacity to still leverage and change components of the climate action plan. And that's something we'll really want to be talking with the council and others, like how do we communicate the work that is still iterative and still influential, of which there's a lot for future iterations of the CAP, but also communicate what's already moving on with the legislature and House. So that'll be a big conversation with you all on the 16th. I imagine if you are interested, we can even show what that tool will look like and start to have a conversation about how applicable it even is, if people like it, do we want to do this? It'll be a lot of time to set it up. And it's certainly something we'll talk about with the full council. Regardless of how substantive the revisions are between now and March, the plan that will be adopted on December 1st will be a stapled together Word document. It will not be anything fancy or anything that's really easily digestible, as well as we're really falling short on like having people see themselves in the plan. So after December 1st, we want to really work with the council and subcommittees to add personal stories to the climate action plan, call out boxes, really bring to life components of the CAP that have positive impacts, could have challenges, and really weave that into the CAP and work with, we have the state chief marketing officer is willing to take on the climate action plan and move it into a nicer, more visually appealing document. And we'll look forward to publishing that in March with more appendices or however the council wants to deal with any iterations or changes between December and March, like the ARPA dollars, funding, budgeting. Some of that will have substantial progress, I think, on between then December and March, and we can certainly update and include that, as well as put out a plan that people want to pick up and actually look at. There'll be a press release and then some limited strategy around social media and other outreach around that updated plan in March as well. So those are the components with the contract for climate access and RISE. I don't want to at all say that this is all the engagement that we'll do, but this is the component of their contract and what they'll speak to.
Okay, thanks, Jane. Appreciate you walking through that. It's always really valuable. Questions and comments for Jane? Iris, go for it.
Hi, I'm really sorry I missed this the first time around. I was looking back through the meetings because but I missed this the first time it came up to the council. But I was looking through this before the meeting and it does not look like what I mean, maybe I was wrong about what we had agreed upon in the beginning, but I thought it was going to be substantive engagement around what Vermonters wanted to see in a climate action plan and how they wanted to change the actions. And to me, this sounds like it's going to be, yeah, no, it doesn't seem like it's going to be that. It seems like it's going to be sort of marketing and getting this plan sort of making sure that Vermonters see it and making sure that Vermonters like are sort of on board with it is what it sounds like, honestly. And that I had been under the impression that we weren't having enough time for public engagement in this process, and we were going to use the time given between the December and the March deadlines to do some of that public engagement so that we could be actually sort of listening to the voices of people. But this doesn't sound like we're going to be listening to the voices of people. It sounds like we're going to be telling them what we are having as a plan. And I'm really concerned about that. And I'm so sorry I missed this before, but I was looking through this, and this does not seem like it is going to be substantive engagement with impacted communities. And I think that that's what we need more of versus some like beautification of the plan. Like, I think it's important to have a digestible plan because I think it's important that things are accessible, but at the maybe not at the expense, but just I'm sort of struggling with something that I personally maybe wrongly thought was going to be some more substantive engagement. And I think maybe that's on me. Maybe I had the perception that was wrong, that we were going to have more time between December and March to engage the community and ask what they wanted. So I think that's probably my bad, but I just wanted to note that and maybe see if other people had accidentally gotten that perception, and also note my concern with the fact that this is more about garnering support for the plan and not doing more engagement and asking people what they need from the plan.
Thanks,
Well,
Iris.
I guess if I could just respond, I see 2 points that Iris is bringing up. So I don't think that it has to not be substantive engagement, but the question and tension for me, and I think this is a question that you as a counselor should bring up at the council level, is the question is to what end? And so I have felt like the March update has felt like an open-ended question for me that no one at the council has really resolved. Like, there are I think that we certainly can be doing substantive engagement with the partner engagement, with the work of just transitions and activating networks. And I also think that even our own online meetings can have a different tone of asking people for feedback and specifically targeting folks that we want to hear from who haven't been held up enough throughout this process. But we want to recognize and appreciate also what we will and won't get to in March and when that next iteration is coming to. And I think that's why I feel somewhat intentionally vague, because I don't know what the council wants to do, but I do know that with much of the initial plan moving into the legislature, there will feel like a bit of a need to pause on substantive revisions until we see what the legislature does or doesn't do with this initial cap, and then we can continue to move on it. I also, as the person who's felt the timeline very intensely, don't want to create another timeline that's unrealistic to meet for substantive revisions by saying we'll have a substantive revised cap by March 1st. That feels disingenuous to me. And so I know that we are going to revise the cap and make substantive changes because we fell short in so many areas. But I just want us to be open to setting a timeline that's true to hear from people and also true to allow the process to unfold with the legislature and elsewhere, so we know where the meaningful work still needs to be done.
Thanks, Jane. I think that's some helpful context. And Iris, before I come back to you, I'm going to invite maybe Kashka to jump in if that's okay.
Well, I'm gonna have to agree with Iris and say that I'm a bit confused and a little bit I'm a little concerned. Jane had said that, we're going to have this plan, and then through the implementation process, we're going to hear public engagement and continue to work on the plan to reflect that information that we gather from the public engagement. And I'm concerned that this is going to be kind of the same old, where people are going to feel just as people came in today speaking, that their voices are not being heard. Why are you hearing my voice? Why do you need my testimony? What is it that's going to make any changes? And I would really like to invite us to say, we've done all this work. And I understand putting deadlines and making things, go for longer. But isn't that what we're trying to do? We're trying to make sure that the implementation of this plan is done right, is done differently than it has been in the past. So while I'm all for beautifying the plan as well, but I think the public engagement piece and the implementation process of the plan needs to happen not 4 years from now, but until March, or even, until the summertime. I'm a little confused. I need more clarification, please.
Jane, did you want to offer anything else before I take any other feedback?
No, I do. I certainly appreciate that. I don't think I'm equipped to sort of provide clarity on the update on the cap. I think that's a council discussion that hasn't happened. I will say I don't want to. Maybe I don't want to conflate the idea that we want to make the plan look more appealing with the feedback that we can still be garnering at the same time. So I hope we can just remove that from this discussion, because I think we all agree that having a digestible plan makes sense, and what timeline that's on can be different than what we want to do with engagement and substantive changes. So I also feel like we can have really substantive engagement and be hearing from the public and understanding that they want a change to the cap, and that can be helping us drive revisions to the climate action plan. So
That's right, Jane. I think that's a great point to recognize, is that I think what I'm hearing from you is that the council itself hasn't given clarity around whether it's going to make substantive changes to the climate action plan in March or April. And we have other climate council members on this as well who can clarify that, or if I've misspoken. And so what I'm hearing is a concern, and there is engagement and ongoing engagement, including engaging people, not just in the climate council's work, but the legislative process and personal action pathways in this scope. But I'm hearing also, and I also want to recognize Amanda and Chris are going to speak. Sorry, I'm using the floor for a second. I'm also hearing a deeper desire to focus on an engagement process that allows not just feedback on what's in the plan, but also just ongoing input and dialogue with impacted communities, and whether or not there is, I'm hearing from Jane a concern that we don't want to do that in a disingenuous way that says this feedback is to what end. And we should be clear how that feedback and input and conversation will happen. But I'm also hearing like we may need to do that work anyway, even as the Climate Council is figuring out. And in doing that work, it may be pushing the Climate Council itself to understand the need for substantive changes in a way that they may not otherwise. So that's what I'm hearing, and just reflecting it back as well. So Amanda, go for it.
Thanks. Jane, I do have a question. If I'm hearing from you concretely that changes are unable to happen, because as you mentioned, that deliberative polling platform that Climate Access was considering building, that does seem like a good forum for people to easily contribute their feedback without having to take the time to testify or join something more formal and really elevate ideas or actions that are being brought up. So that's question one. And then I just have a quick comment about utilizing all the public comments that were submitted in the public comment forum on the website. And I certainly don't want to like disqualify or do injustice to other subcommittees that have been taking those comments into consideration. But I think using the time period after the cap is formally adopted to really bring those comments, or just put more attention to those comments, because like the comments that we've heard in this forum, also people have been submitting comments all along, and those might be able to affect changes to the draft cap.
Thank you for both of those. So ironically, just Marion prodded me at the beginning of this meeting in the Teams chat to remind me that Carrie Hengstenberg, who gave us, and I think that Corey Rockefeller, yes, you're both on, they helped us get caught up with all of those all the public comment up until the end of October to ensure that the public comment was rolled into the public engagement findings that we did and summarized with climate access for inclusion in this climate action plan. But we're continuing to get a ton of comments from the end of October till now, where they're obvious, like associations with subcommittees. Marion does a great job, and others at forwarding them to the subcommittees. Billy Coster, I know, sent on 2 substantive letters to Ag and Eco yesterday around components of their recommendations for their consideration. And we have ideas on how to continue. Carrie in particular has met with someone that she wants to set up a meeting with us that had to be canceled to think about how we have an ongoing continuing process that's much more responsive to the comments that we get online, because there are a lot of comments that we get online. And so we want to use those. And then the deliberative polling platform, just so you know, we've talked a lot about, could we set it up sort of as a bifurcated polling platform where we were explicit about actions that were on a legislative track, and so that, like, comments on those were best suited through the legislative process, but then be explicit on the remaining components of the cap, of which it'll be, like 85% of actions in the cap will have legislative action right out of the gate. There's still ability to influence and change those. And so I know Climate Access has met with their subcontractor who sets this polling platform up to think about how we could communicate sort of 2 main pathways, of one where the public could really have a lot more influence on shaping and molding future actions and program development of the policies that are put on the table through the cap, and others that they, direct them to the legislature for action. So I do think that it could be a really great tool to help people get involved in a more accessible way that's actually going somewhere.
Okay, folks, we're at time, so I need to, before I take additional questions, ask for our subcommittee, are we willing to give this an additional 5 minutes at least here? Any concerns about that? Okay, great. Chris, I think you're up next.
Yeah, sorry I had to miss some of the conversation. It just it feels like, I mean, as a council member, just as we're packing everything that we possibly can into, like a few more days, while we're also trying to do our other jobs in our day life. And I mean, I'm beginning to really struggle with, and this is not a political statement. This is not a threat. This is just my sharing how I'm feeling. I'm struggling with the plan, because one of the things that, I noted to this committee several times is I've never seen a just transition when you make these kind of policy shifts. And now it sure feels like we're setting ourselves up for a situation where we're going to be trying to back in just transitions into a rubric that we've been told is basically a puzzle that you can't move one piece without having another piece, swapped in, especially on the greenhouse gas reduction. And I'm going to have 28 hours of driving back and forth to Virginia to ponder this some more, but I'm just trying to think through, what does this look like going forward, to where we really are held to account, and not just us, the folk who are going to be implementing the plan that we produce, and ultimately be able to make that just transition happen. Because I feel like we're just on a path towards approving a plan without really having, in-depth thought through how does it get modified to make it a plan that truly has just transitions at its foundation. Right now, I'm a little concerned it's more like tinsel on a tree. And so I'm just struggling with that, because it's nobody's fault. It's you know, it's where we found ourselves. It was kind of the cards that were dealt. But we may need to really, you know, talk to the administration, talk to the legislature about, you know, I don't know, a different set of cards going forward to really make this work. So again, this is not, I'm just sharing how I'm feeling.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's right. I think this is challenging. The Climate Council, and those of you who are on the Climate Council, this is a really challenging moment for you to try and meet this requirement for December 1st and then figure out what next, right? And so trying to figure out both simultaneously what next while you're racing to the finish line. I just want to acknowledge it's hard for Climate Council members to do. And there is a lack of clarity about what's next that I'm feeling reverberate in this conversation tonight as well. And especially when it comes to thinking about, we can do more public engagement. We want to do more public engagement. And where's that? How is that going to continue to influence like the rulemaking, the legislative process, and the ongoing work that there is a lot more work to do after the 12/1 date, just not clarity on how that's going to unfold. So that's what I'm hearing. But Kelly, do you want to add something else?
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple things. So the biggest thing that I've been hearing from the experience of the public engagement to date is that mostly we're preaching to the choir. The folks who are coming to the meetings and engaging are already very much thinking about climate change and already thinking about how it's impacting them. And the people that we're failing to reach are those who are very busy with other things. And I am glad to see in this plan that there is an intention to reach back out to some of those community stakeholders and try to reach out to some of the frontline and impacted communities. If we didn't do it already, I'm a little bit concerned about why we're trying to do it again now. If we didn't do well enough in the first round, when we could still hear from them and make changes to this initial draft, it feels a little bit, better late than never, I guess, but it does feel a little bit concerning to me. I hope it goes well. I hope that we can really reach those folks and hear from them. But I also hear what, Jane said, we don't want to be disingenuous and say that we want to be able to say your voice and what you're saying will have an impact in what way. From what I've heard from other folks on the council, people really do want to come back, keep revising and keep iterating on this because we feel like the timeline was so short. We really do want to hear from people. So I hope that we can give a clear message in the near future of saying, this is when we're going to come back with some revisions. Here's what we can revise. I really hope that we can have some clarity on that so that we can get real feedback and then use it and do something good with it. I know that that's something that a lot of council members really want to do. And so I'm hoping we can give that clarity. The one thing that I'm thinking about with this public engagement contract is we only have the contract for a certain duration. We have a certain window here where we're saying, this is what we've already signed them up for. This is what they're doing. And my remaining concern is, how do we know that we are making the best use of what's left in the contract, what we've agreed with them, and that we're not just educating people about what we've put in the cap is great, but getting that feedback, at least with some ability to get that feedback and then turn it around at a later date, even if that's at the end of that, after the end of the contract with our public engagement folks. I think it would just be really nice to get the most out of what we have remaining in this contract so that we can really hear from people and make sure that they know that it's going somewhere, and even if it's not tomorrow that it's being acted on, it's going somewhere. It's going to be in the next version of the climate action plan.
Great, thanks, Kelly. Some nice constructive feedback there. Kashka, I think it's you, and then we're gonna have to wrap this one up, folks, because we need to wrap up our meeting. Go ahead.
Okay, so as somebody who is engaged with the low and moderate income Vermonters, I can completely attest to the fact that climate change, once you start discussing climate change, it is definitely not in their day-to-day conversation. That is not what is important to them. What is important to them is their financial burdens. It's their burdens on their health, as well as, you know, burdens that will come up for their families and for their children. And it is a lot more difficult to engage those people in a conversation when they have no time to do anything except try to live day to day. Now, having said that, having a plan and finally having something to say to these folks, there is a plan, and this is what's being implemented, gives an opportunity for feedback on certain policies. That's when you can have a conversation. That's when you can say, this is the policy that's coming, you know, that's going to be implemented, or this is what's going to happen. How is this going to affect you and your life and your children's lives? And then getting that feedback and having an opportunity to then go back and change the plan to make sure that it is equitable. That is my concern, that we are putting a plan and then just hearing people's voices at the end and just not giving that an opportunity to finally have a voice inside this plan to say, this is what's affecting you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Kashka, thanks. I really appreciate that. And I just want to acknowledge there's some great stuff in the chat box here. Iris, you made a great point, which is like, this is really getting some juices flowing, and just want to acknowledge Iris's point that, yeah, let's actually build out time for public engagement and not rush to the next version so that we actually have time to do this. And I'm seeing that in your comment. And then also just want to acknowledge that I saw Kelly's comment around translation as well, not really being called out, and hoping that that's a part of the plan, even if it's not something obviously that Climate Access and RISE are doing. And I think to Jane's point, so with that in mind, Iris, you were right. This is going to take way longer than the time we had on the agenda. It's always something our subcommittee is very deeply interested in doing. And hopefully, Jane, this is valuable as you start to think about the next step. First, so to wrap it up, so we, Sue and I had hoped that COVID transmission rates and positive cases would be lower, and we would pitch to you all a great idea of an in-person opportunity to gather in December, and how wonderful that will feel in the day when it could come. But it doesn't seem like that day is in December. And so instead, what we want to pitch is that we have one meeting in December on, I believe, the 18th. I don't have it in front of me. And that we, whatever that Thursday is that week, and that we use that meeting as an opportunity to come back to this conversation around public engagement, and what exactly the role of our subcommittee could be specifically, and also to really hear from the work of Carrie and her team at Department of Environmental Conservation. And there may be some other things that we want to do at that meeting. And one of those things might be to sort of map out, like, what is our subcommittee's role potentially in an ongoing way, and what will our future meeting schedule be like? And so some of that is, of course, not something we can do until the Climate Council itself makes some decisions about what its ongoing work will be, and so how we fit into that process. And so December seemed like a really good time to come back to that conversation. So with that in mind, I'm sort of looking to all of you to say, does that make sense for all of you? And sorry, it's not the 18th, it would be, I believe, the 16th of December. We can have one meeting in December. All right, I got a thumbs up from Amanda. Kosh is still raising her hand, but I know that thumbs up from Chris. Okay, great, thank you. I will go ahead and send out that invitation then. And on that note, holy moly, it's 5:57. I think we're wrapping it up. Really appreciate the incredible conversation tonight. What an incredible, again, Vanessa and 350, thank you for organizing and coordinating. What an incredible public comment period to hear from such a diversity of voices tonight. Really appreciated that opportunity. And it was so well timed to be right before the conversation around public engagement that we just had. So thank you for that. And happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving or happy holiday.
Happy holidays. Thanks, Kasia.
Take